Hello, and welcome to episode 35 of Game Design Hour, the podcast where I sit down with the people who make the video games you know and love. I'm your host, Miles Goldsmith, and on today's episode, I'm interviewing Liam Edwards, the creator and director of Curse to Golf, about his work on the game. Curse to Golf is a roguelike golfing game where you are stuck in golf purgatory and you are tasked with golfing your way out of there. Let's get into the interview. Hello.
Good. Hi there.
So what was the first thing that really sparked your interest in creating video games?
Tough questions first. I don't really know, to be honest. There isn't like a moment. I think when I got a Nintendo 64, it was something where I realized very quickly that games was something I really enjoyed. And I made friends via talking about video games. And it just seemed like from that moment, it was always going to be something that was a part of my identity as a person, was that this Nintendo thing. I would always talk about it at every opportunity I could. But I think as a kid, naturally, I was very creative. I was into a lot of things. I still am as an adult now. I play a lot of sports. I like a lot of music. I was really interested in Warhammer when I was a kid too, and painting and stuff like that. So I was naturally quite creative. I was not very good at any of those things. I was creative. And I hate the word expressing myself, but I just enjoyed doing things. And I very clearly remember being a kid and being really into the Nintendo 64 and video games that I made a fake video game document with my dad and my brother called Zombies that I wanted to send to Nintendo. I remember doing this at like 9 or 10 years old, which is amazing to think now, full circle, having done this. But as I got older, I never imagined I'd be able to make games. I grew up in a small town in Wales in the United Kingdom, and yeah, I don't know any video game developers from that area. I didn't know anybody who went on to make games. It wasn't really until I moved to Japan doing podcasting, actually, sort of talking to other video game developers and being really inspired by them, that I really got the spark to think, oh, I can be creative in a way where I can make my own video games. And so it was kind of twofold, to be honest. Two different moments in life where I realized games was something that maybe I should pursue.
How did you first learn how to make video games?
I get asked this question a lot. It comes in various forms, whether it's how do I get into video games? How do I make a game and stuff like that. I think now we live in an era where there are so many resources. There's so many free tools. There's so many YouTube tutorials that honestly, you can just type, how do I make a video game? And then you'll find results to make stuff. I think the most important thing I tell people these days in terms of like how to start making a game is honestly and simply just do it. People spend so long in their heads about any new hobby or any new passion being like, oh, I'm going to build up to it and I'm going to, think about it more. And there's going to be a right time to do this. There is never a right time. It's just the time to start. And I would highly recommend people now who are interested in making games to download something like Game Maker or Unity and just look at tutorials on YouTube and start looking at, Masahiro Sakurai's new YouTube channel and look at stuff like that. And then you'll be really heavily inspired to make stuff. But also, if you have skills already, if you're an artist or you're a animator and stuff like that, lean heavily into those skills when you make your game. And then you're already on a really good head start. For me, I was terrible at almost everything. I was just a generalist. And being a generalist meant that I had to try and do little bits of everything, just very poorly. But as a cohesive piece, I could do something. So my recommendation to anybody is just to start, whether it's to go to university and learn, whether it's you're in school and you want to do it as a hobby, or whether you're just interested. There's a new video by NoClip, Danny O'Dwyer, who makes NoClip documentaries. They recently tried to start making a game just to see what it's like. And I think that's a really valuable experience.
How did you first come up with the idea for the game and the concept of golf purgatory?
I'd like to say it came to me in a dream, like a Beatles song. I was actually listening to a podcast. I was just thinking to myself as a game designer, because it was my job, about different ideas. And I was thinking, why has nobody made a physics-based roguelike? And the reality is it's because it's a very stupid idea. Merging this idea of something that's a random generated experience, like a roguelike, with something that is the natural RNG of life, which is, physics. And combining those two things is very difficult. So I was just experimenting with a ball in a dungeon and thinking, how would I get this ball to the end of a roguelike dungeon or a Metroid style dungeon? And it was more of an interesting way about moving how to move through a roguelike. Most roguelikes are just standard action combat games, or you move via cards or something. There's very kind of tried and true ways of roguelikes working. And I just thought, one of the only games that has an interesting take is Crypto the Necrodancer, where you dance, to the beat. And I thought, oh, what about physics, like a ball bouncing through a dungeon? And then very quickly, when I was prototyping, I started to think, oh, this feels like golf. This is kind of like golf. You're setting the power, you're setting the angle, and you're combining those two things to hit like a shot, like you would in golf. And then golf is actually something I played as a kid, so I knew the rules and stuff like that. So I just thought, what if I just theme this around golf? Then I can make golf-based power-ups or golf-based artwork or, golf-based rules. Then it became a case of, oh, I can just combine these two things to make a golf game. I leaned very heavily into the golf elements. And yeah, then it sort of took itself from there. And I got to be able to make this new product off the back of that prototype, where now it's all about golf and golf purgatory, and it has all this lore and this history and stuff like that. That wasn't all just me. We had a narrative designer called Liz Mobley, who's very talented, who also was basically the fuel for the fire. She did a lot of research into like the mythos around different golf people, and even going really far back to the people who invented golf. And yeah, it's really, really cool. So a ball in a dungeon is essentially how it started.
After coming up with the original idea, what was your brainstorming process like, and what were the first few steps that you took towards creating the game?
When we made the prototype, we built the team, and we decided, okay, we have to make this something else. It has to be a bigger, a better version of this. What are the things we want to add? What are the things we want to remove? And the prototype that I'd made was essentially just a blueprint. And we took from it what worked and what we knew people liked, which was this golf rogue purgatory thing with very simple arcadey mechanics. And then we decided, so what can we do to make this better? So there was only like 3 or 4 power-ups in the original version. So we knew immediately that we wanted to make a lot more power-ups, and we knew immediately that we wanted to make more levels, and we wanted to add and inject more character into the world. So it all became a case of thinking what was really good about the prototype and what we need to get to making it a product. Because unfortunately, at the end of the day, when you make games, you're still selling a product, and you have to think about how to convert something into a fully fleshed out experience. So it became something like, what is the prototype missing? The prototype is missing the story. The prototype is missing, a whole suite of like power-ups or an economy where players can engage in buying and selling things. And we also need to flesh out the mechanics. And the fact is, at that point, it became really great for me because I'm not a very good programmer at all. So the reason the original game is so limited is because I'm limited in my skill to program. But once we had Sean, our lead programmer, come on, it was a case of I could ask him, hey, can you make a rocket ball for me? We'd test it, and then it would be a case of, wow, this is really, really fun. Okay, let's try a drill ball. What if we could drill through the ground? And it was kind of like building these different layers on top of something that we already knew worked. And yeah, that we had to, of course, cut ourselves at a certain point, and there's lots of stuff that didn't make it into the game. But yeah, it was a case of, we have this thing. How do we now extract what was good and then make it 10 times bigger, almost 100 times bigger?
So you said you had played a bit of golf when you were younger. How long have you been playing golf, and what just pieces of normal golf did you incorporate into the game?
When I was younger, golf was quite a thing. Like a couple of my family members played it. My grandmother, she played it incessantly, and that's how I kind of got into it. I was good at it, so I was expected to go play in like tournaments and stuff like that. And I went to a golf academy, actually. It was kind of a thing when I was younger. But for me, it was a lot of stress, and it was something I just did not enjoy doing. I just wanted to go home and play Zelda, right? I didn't want to be playing golf. So I kind of didn't like it. It was a sport that I fell out of love with. Not that I really loved it in the first place. So it was just something I knew a lot about, right? I didn't really have any feelings towards it. I didn't make a golf game because I liked golf when I was younger. I made a golf game because I knew about the rules and I knew about those things and the theming. Golf and video games is something that have been around for a long time. It was just very easy to draw upon those experiences. And I tried to incorporate golf as much as I could. The irony of it all is actually I started to play golf again because of this game. And now, as an adult who doesn't have to worry about playing in tournaments or being stressed or being good, I'm actually really enjoying it at the moment. So I've been playing a lot of golf again because of making this game, which I find to be quite the romantic experience. But yeah, I incorporated as much as I could. I tried to follow whether it was terminology that our team who don't play golf had no idea about, and they'd be like, players don't understand this, and I'm like, but it's the golf way, it's the golf rules, it's a mulligan, for example, or something like that, or trying to make sure that we incorporate a lot of golf puns because we're trying to stay tried and true to golf. I think a lot of people don't realize just how golf heavy it is, actually. I think anybody who actually plays real golf probably could see a lot more in it from the words and terminology standpoint. Most of our achievements are based around birdie and bogey and albatross and stuff like that. So I tried as much as I possibly could without alienating an entire audience. Yeah, it's not Tiger Woods PGA Tour golf, but yeah, I try to be really heavy into learning a lot, and a lot of our rule sets are based around golf. So if it didn't make a lot of the decisions I made, if they didn't make sense in a golf context, I just would overrule it, and I wouldn't continue.
Beyond the game of golf, what were some of the inspirations behind Curse to Golf?
There's two different answers to this. One is, of course, the gameplay stuff. Because it's a roguelike, we did look at a lot of other roguelikes. I played a lot of roguelikes. It's not something that I'm obsessed with or like a genre that I particularly really like. But I've played, I think we all have, we've played the Spelunkies, the Slay the Spires. We've played a lot of those roguelikes, and they all offer something really unique and something interesting, whether it's the cards or it's map generation or it's aesthetic styles and stuff. There wasn't any key unique inspiration, but there was definitely just us picking the things that we enjoyed, whether it was, we have power-ups in the game. We presented them as cards because one, you've got like, your scorecard in golf, but theming it around cards meant that it was kind of tried and true to follow other roguelikes, right? Roguelikes do use card-based mechanics quite a lot. Our map is, multi-choice different things that is very heavily inspired from Slay the Spire. So from a gameplay standpoint, it was kind of us making our own, because there isn't really a game like Curse to Golf that we've seen. So we didn't really have other games to look at and be like, oh, let's do it like them. But we just kind of took the sort of roguelike elements we enjoyed. But the other flip side is that we wanted to reach a level of polish. So, in video games, I think a lot of people they underestimate how much polish goes into a video game. And like one of the great comments we keep getting about Curse to Golf is that people keep saying it's like Nintendo-like quality in terms of its animations and its polish and its presentation. And that is entirely great and positive, but it's entirely intentional because one of our big things was to make it look like a highly polished Nintendo title. So when people say, hey, this feels like a Nintendo game, I'm like, thank you. That's very nice of you to say, but also good because we made it be like that. So our inspiration for the polish came from just us loving, very expressly, specifically me, loving Nintendo games and really just wanting to capture that sort of magic that we all feel when we play Nintendo games. So I hope that shines through with Curse to Golf.
A very important part of golf games and games in similar genres and stuff is physics. How hard was it to get the physics to work, and what were some strange issues you ran into with getting the physics to work?
This is more of a question from my programmer, Sean, who's had to wrestle with Unity's internal physics and then build his own physics. And also he's had to be beaten down by me, who play tests it and tweaks it. But as a designer, I had everything exposed to me to be able to keep tweaking. One of the early problems that we found was that if you hit a golf ball, when do you make it stop, right? What are the material properties of the ground, whether it's grass or it's concrete or it's a wall? How often does it bounce? How does the velocity decay? What is a fun middle ground? Because the reality is golf shots in Curse to Golf are like they're real physics. It is entirely physics. But once the ball hits the ground, there is certain things we do to make it stop sooner than it would if it was a real ball, because you don't want to watch a ball bouncing forever until it comes to a stop, because it's kind of uncontrollable. So one of the things we did very early is we made it so the ball decays in velocity a lot quicker than it would naturally. And that's because the levels are, sort of these boxy, small generated things. So we tempered with the physics a little bit upon bouncing. But the thing we found then was the problem was that if you were aiming for a platform this big and you hit the shot, the ball would just bounce and then roll off the edge. And that was no fun at all because you're just hitting a shot and then every time it just rolls off the edge, the ball would keep rolling. As I think not many people have noticed that in Curse to Golf, the ball doesn't roll. It just bounces to a stop. It doesn't actually roll like a golf ball would. We have like no rolling whatsoever. But what we did very quickly was we added spin in the game, the ability for you to spin the ball because that allowed you to stop it from falling off platforms. And it applies velocity to the ball over a period of time of you mashing the thing. So we have like real physics and then we have like these fake, nice, fun physics that make it feel a lot better. What problems does that cause? Well, I could give you 1,000 lists of bugs of crap that, honest to God, like was just never ending, impossible, like headache inducing problems. Ball just getting stuck in places, balls just landing on things and then flying off the screen, or the physics not working correctly. And then when you add power-ups into the mix and the power-ups changes the way the physics works, oh, it causes so many bugs. Yeah, so it was kind of this really great thing, and then we made it work to our game. So we did break the laws of physics. So apologies to Isaac Newton. Yeah, we got it into a place where it worked for us and it was bug-free and stuff. Well, hopefully as bug-free as possible.
Pretty much every game has ideas that were cut for one reason or another. Were there any interesting ideas that were talked about for Curse to Golf at one point, but just never ended up in the final version of the game?
So many. so many. Oh my God. One of the original things that we had that got cut was mini games. So we had the ability to, in these branching paths to, choose to go to the shop or choose a chest, or in exchange for more rewards, you would play these mini games. And we wanted it to be something like WarioWare style or like Kirby Superstar style mini games where you were able to make these really fun golf-based mini games, similar to like, break the targets in Super Smash Brothers or something like that. You're smashing golf balls into, targets and stuff. So we had all these mini games that we wanted to do, but we just couldn't because they require artwork, they require UI, they require like systems for you to engage with as the player, and we just didn't have time to build them. So there was mini games that we had to cut. We had multiplayer in the game, which of course we're going to revisit at some point. That worked, that we unfortunately had to cut. Also, we had more power-ups. We had like a boomerang power-up that you would hit and then you could get it to come back to you instead. There was all sorts of things. Yeah, there was characters too. There was like 2 different characters. There was a character that would give you outfits and stuff. Every video game, every creator has like these lists of things they wish had made it into the game that got cut. And Curse to Golf is no different. Unfortunately for us, we did only make the game in a year and a half. So our timeline was very, very strict. And we had to be very, very particular about what got cut and what didn't. But yeah, mini games was something that from the very beginning, we were absolutely certain was it going to be in the game, but unfortunately never made it in.
While designing the different holes and levels of the game, what sort of research did you do into designs of different golf courses?
Because I knew about golf and I had an idea about golf in my head already, it was very easy for me to just intuitively make these things. But I made rules for myself. Every design has to have rules for you to have consistency. Otherwise, the player just is playing one hole that feels like this, and then the next hole is like completely different, and that's very jarring. So everything has to have a very consistent thorough line, or has to have certain rules, so it makes the player get used to those rules. In the very early biomes, like the first biome, the whole rule set is essentially normal golf hazards: water, sand, rough, and then a sprinkling of stuff like TNT and stuff. But I wanted to make it so every hole had a variety of different shots that you would have to hit. So you always start with the driver, and then you have the choice to hit an iron or a wedge at certain different points, as well as the driver again. Every hole was built with the idea that the player will go through different sections, whether it's going horizontally or it's going vertically. Everything is almost like a different corridor. And the way it presents itself would be that every time the player has a shot, they should have 2 or 3 options about what to do. whether it's to hit the ball into a teleporter, whether it's to hit the ball into a statue, whether it's to try and bypass a wall. Every opportunity, the player should have at least 2 to 3 choices, especially depending on what cards they have, to approach the shot. So every time I designed a hole or I designed a stage, it would be with the idea that every shot should open opportunities, because the hazards are like these standard golf hazards. It's almost like the very simple nature of, if you're a golfer and you hit your tee shot and then you're 150 yards away from the flag, but you've got 2 bunkers and then there's water on the left, you're engaging in tactical thinking. Like, what club do I use? That's kind of what I wanted to do to emulate real golf, is to give the player these different opportunities to try different things. Oh, I could phase ball through here. Or, I could scatter shot to do this. Or I could hit a driver and bounce it off the wall and go down here. Everything was presented in kind of a tactical way. A friend of mine described it as Tom Clancy's golf tactics. So, and then with that in mind, the idea then was that every hole should just be a golf hole, that every shot you're given these different options.
Managing scope is a very important aspect of creating games. How did you work to manage the scope of Curse to Golf while you were working on it?
That's, even in hindsight, something I'm still thinking about. I think there are a couple of things that work in my favor as a creator. One is that I personally like finishing things and getting them out there so people can play. So I don't really want to be spending 3 to 4 years of my life making the same thing with nobody playing it. So the scope for Curse to Golf was that it had this very small itch.io prototype in the beginning, and I didn't think it would be a big project. I thought it would be a small project. They were just this small game that we'd sell, that we'd make a little bit of money or whatever, and we'd just get it out on Nintendo Switch, and it's another game for the back catalog with an interesting idea. Unfortunately, all of that sort of changed when we announced the game. And when we announced the game, we got this huge overwhelming of positivity and a lot of people very interested. So all of a sudden, it became this case where we had expectations that we had to meet. And because of those expectations, we had to change the scope of the game a little bit to make it bigger, to make it a bit more of a bigger deal, a bigger project. I don't want to say a big deal because it's still a small golf game in most regards, but we had to make it. So one of the things we did is we added boss fights, because boss fights were not originally planned, and we added more power-ups, and we added a story, and we added cutscenes, and it became this thing where all of these things started building on top of each other, but all with the intention of being able to meet deadlines and being able to do those things. So there were things that we had to do, like we just talked about cutting stuff, like mini games. That was immediately cut because we knew we just couldn't do it. The storyline for the game initially was going to be something along the lines of the game Pyre, where you would have to actually, complete it multiple different times to, release different teammates and all that kind of things. And there was actually an entirely longer story to Curse to Golf than initially thought. And we had a lot more dialogue, but we couldn't do it because we already had so many cutscenes and we had so many things going on. It was a case of maybe not very orthodox. It was kind of unorthodox in the case of every month was like an evaluation of where we're going and what we're doing. We knew that it was 18 holes and we knew it was 4 areas, but we experimented with the structure as we kept going. And once we sort of made more tools, it became easier to make more content. Iteration is super important in video games. So we didn't want to stray away from trying to make it better every time. I think one of the problems sometimes with video games, the balance between scope and production, is that a lot of people decide what the game is going to be before they go into production, in pre-production. But the problem is then once you get into production, you start playing the game or you start working on it and you realize very quickly, oh no, this game is not very fun or this is not very good. And then you have to sort of either change it or keep going. And it's very hard. With Curse to Golf, it was very flexible. And because of that flexibility, it meant that the scope could change. We called it variable goals. Like, here's the maximum amount of things we want to do. But depending on the time it's taking to do things, we could do 70% or we could do 50% of things. And yeah, I think with Curse to Golf, we probably got to about 70% of what we wanted to do done. And then the rest, unfortunately, maybe will come later.
In the start of the game, the main character dies by getting struck by lightning. Were there any other interesting death ideas that you had that you just didn't go with?
No, I think he was always going to die by lightning because he died by lightning in the original prototype. And I just did that on a whim one day. There are all these funny stories about people being struck by lightning on golf courses with their golf clubs. So it felt like a natural thing. And of course, we wanted to tie into the fact that there was this golf god that had sort of caused all of this. And he looks a bit like Zeus, so maybe it would be a case of him, using lightning. No, I think we all found it funny. And then when John animated it, our artist animated, and we saw it, we were like, "Oh yeah, that's got to be the way to go." And you can use lightning to crack the ground open. And yeah, no, I think with that one, that was kind of signed and sealed. And actually, it would have been interesting. We could have done more gory things. What if he got hit by like a golf cart, like he was, absolutely mutilated by a golf cart, or I don't know what if he's playing in Florida. It could be a course in Florida, and he could be eaten by alligators, maybe, or something interesting. No, but I think actually he was always going to be struck by lightning.
In many roguelike games, the player gets reset by their character dying. But since the main character in Curse to Golf is already dead, you couldn't do that. How did you come across the idea of the stroke counter?
It was a case of there has to be limitations, right? You have to have health. So if you have a life counter or something that is impeding you, then it becomes ever present that you're thinking about it. And if you're aware of these things, you're paying more attention. Now in golf, everyone pays attention to how many shots they hit because they want that scorecard to be lower. So what if you do the inverse of that and you meet in the middle? Hitting a shot in Coast to Golf matters because you are presently aware that it's your health. So it feels like a real golf, like it feels a bit like real golf. And it became a thing very early on that when I, was making the sort of Metroid style levels or these roguelike levels, and I was putting the goal of the hole, I was just hitting shots blindly and there was no danger. I originally thought maybe I could have enemies and you'd have to hit the golf ball into enemies and they can deal damage to you. But that, when you statically are in a position and, you can't move, it panics the player and is not a very good idea. So I kind of scrapped that very early on. So I then thought, well, what if the golf ball is your soul and every shot you hit, it degrades or is something happening to it. So to get to the hole is, a risk reward, right? The risk is you're destroying your soul, but the reward is you get to continue. So yeah, it became like kind of a natural thing where I was like, okay, well, par 5, start with 5 shots and it just degrades down. And, if you don't reach the hole within 5 or how many shots it would take based around, how big the hole is, you would be cursed to start again. And that's kind of where the idea of purgatory came from. The idea that you have to, go through these trials to get out. And it did feel like, oh, I'm dying and restarting. I'm cursed. I'm cursed to keep doing this. That is where the name Curse to Golf came from.
Were there any interesting concepts for levels or pieces of levels that you thought about that just didn't end up making it into the game?
We wanted to do a whole bunch of things with opening doors. Like you would get keys by hitting the golf ball into keys and then opening doors, or you would hit like big red switches. Like if you could aim your golf ball into a big red switch, it would like make platforms fall down or something like that. Yeah, there was a whole host of things. We wanted to have slopes in the game where the ball could actually roll down slopes, but our physics in the end just wouldn't allow for it. So yeah, there was other stages where I wanted to have like stages that revolve around something that's in the middle, like I don't know, a giant octopus that's like slapping its tentacles around the stage or something, very Mario Galaxy style. There was a whole bunch of things. One of the things I would like to revisit is gravity as well. We wanted to have like little gravity things, like black holes where the ball would land and then shoot off in certain distances. Yeah, I think there's a whole bunch of things we'd like to do in the future, but it does feel like we're kind of limited by the fact that we just have a ball to manipulate in these stages. We did have these puzzle holes where you would actually have to finish the hole in a certain amount of shots, like a par 3 or a par 4, and you would have strict cards that would help you solve the puzzle of the hole. And it's a very small layout and you just have to figure it out. That was something that was done that we wanted to do as well, to break up the sort of par 5 par count thing and have another spin on it. So there's a whole bunch of things and I'm still revisiting now. Now I'm looking at DLC or future updates and stuff like that. It's kind of hard thinking about designing games and then thinking about how many things don't make it into the game. It's sad. Hopefully we get to revisit all of it.
Which parts of the game did you have to put the most time and effort into to get just the way you wanted it?
The most difficult parts for me personally was when I had to design a new area. So we have the 4 areas of the game. The first area is where we started. It's very much heavily based on the prototype I'd made. But when I had to come up with the themes and the ideas for the new areas, you have to keep them very similar, but you also have to make them distinct and new. So for example, the area 2, Oasis, is, this place full of sand dunes and is large and open and quite expansive. And then the third area is very tight and it's full of these vines and it becomes a bit more of like a maze. And then the fourth area is, it's these very small platforms that you have to land on. So designing a new area and then balance testing and make it feel similar but also different was really, really hard. So it took a lot of time for me to like transition from making one area of holes to the next. And that was always the biggest time sink for me. Honestly, one of the hardest things, which is really boring, is that the menus in the UI just took so long for us, just based around what team members we had, because we didn't have full-time team members for art and UI, and we only had one programmer, Sean, for the most part, so he had to balance all these things. So it was a case of trying to realize what was blocking us and what was not blocking us so we could complete tasks. But one of the things that always kept coming up was a pain was menus and UI. That was really hard. It's a very boring answer, but yeah, other than that, it was the transitioning of creating new areas and trying to make the holes distinct.
Are there any fun and interesting Easter eggs that you added into the game?
Yeah, there's a ton. There's quite a few. There's references in card names and references in card text. The one that everyone notices is the time stop. The time stop card was nicknamed The World in development, which is a reference to the anime JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and the character Dio. So in the card text, it says Dio in capital letters. And a lot of people are like, oh, that's a JoJo reference. Yep, there's that. And then there's a whole bunch of other art references that John put into the game for different things. My own personal reference is there is a reference to previous games I've made in the art in small places. The biggest reference, and the one I enjoy the most, is right at the start of the game when you're playing the tutorial and it's meant to resemble like a TV broadcast. The names at the bottom that show like the golf scorecard, that's the team members. That's all of us. So that's my favorite reference.
Looking back now, what do you wish you could have done differently before the initial launch of the game?
We had a major problem with the Switch version of the game that I really regret. Yeah, the Switch issue was a problem. It was timing, and unfortunately we shipped on every platform at the same time. So these things are very difficult and it's very hard to catch. But I do regret the fact that the Switch port released with a crash bug in the boss fight, but we got that fixed. I don't know. We are very, very grateful that the launch went the way it did, because I think we've reached a pinnacle at the point where everyone's annoyed that they see Curse to Golf so much on Twitter or YouTube or Twitch or something like that. And that's a really good problem to have. People keep telling me, like, I keep seeing your game everywhere, and like they're almost annoyed by it. And for me, that's great, because it's awesome that everyone's seeing the game everywhere. And yeah, the critical reviews have been brilliant, and the user feedback has been fantastic. I do wish we'd shipped the game with one of the features that we've added in already, which is the zoom camera, so you can zoom the camera out, because we didn't realize just how much people would have a problem with not being able to see certain things. And we did have the camera in the game at one point. We just removed it because it was unstable. But I wish we'd spent a little more time to make sure we shipped day one with that, and we would have curtailed quite a few negative reviews. So yeah, no, I don't know. It's hard to say, because at the end of the day, we had a very, very good launch and not many indie games get to do that. So very happy.
What was the biggest lesson that you learned from working on Curse to Golf?
It was a lesson I was already sort of well aware of, but I take with me going on, is that game development just does not consist anymore of just making games. It's everything else that you put into it, whether it's promoting your game correctly, whether it's making GIFs and videos to post on Twitter, whether it's being present at events, whether it's exposing the game early. Don't be so precious about giving out demos and letting people play it. Video game development now, especially for indies, consists of not only making the game, that's the basic, but you have to learn to promote it. You have to learn to get good at understanding stuff like Steam and platforms and how to get yourself into opportunities like a Nintendo Direct or something, because you don't really stand a chance otherwise. And it was something I was presently aware of, but I had to really step up to do more of on Curse to Golf. And the other thing is just about how games work and sell. part of the reason Coaster Golf is the way Coaster Golf is because it's a golf roguelike and there are no other golf roguelikes. Therefore, the hook of the game is really important because Coaster Golf, if it was just another golf game, would not be in the position it is right now because there are tons of golf games. So one of my only bits of advice learning from this for myself and for others is really think about the hook of your game because that's really important.
What would be your biggest piece of advice to newer game devs trying to go and get their first game finished?
Finish it. That's it. Just finish it. There is an incredible article by Derek Yu who made Spelunky about finishing games, and everyone should read it because that is exactly what you should do. You need to finish things to understand the process. If you're really good at making ideas, that's great, but you're not very useful to people who need to make a game. And everyone should need to go through the production process from genesis of an idea into a prototype, into changing that into production, into continued production, into shipping a game. Because even just finishing a game and going from being gold to getting it out is a tried and tribulation of bugs and promotions and everything that is just as worthwhile to learn. So finishing a game, regardless of whether it's good or it's bad, it doesn't matter. That experience alone will help you infinitely. I have the utter respect for game creators who have finished and led projects who have gone through. I don't care if the game's good or not, but the fact that you went through a 2-year cycle of or more of like all of these different things and you actually shipped the game, kudos to you because it's very, very hard. So if you're looking to finish your game, don't be precious about it. Don't try to make it perfect. Don't keep working on it. Explore like the more you work on one idea, the less you are exploring other good ideas. And I can tell you, whatever you think of your idea right now, whether you think it's the best idea you'll ever have, it's not. Coaster Golf is not the best idea I will ever have. You know, there's always other ideas, but the more time you have to explore them, the better.
What's next for you? What are you working on now?
I'm still working on Coaster Golf. The reality is that, unfortunately, I have to keep working on Coaster Golf. Not unfortunately. It's a good problem to have. There's bugs, there's feedback that needs to be done. But now we're sort of, we're 2 to 3 weeks in. Actually, today is 3 weeks since we launched the game. We are, trying to get one of the big major patches out on all consoles with a plethora of bug fixes and a new feature. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go away and we're going to start working on DLC and we're going to hopefully make some really cool updates for the game going forward. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been great interviewing you.
Thank you so much, Miles. Thank you for putting up with our studio's terrible internet. I'm very sorry about that.
And that's the interview. I want to thank you so much for checking out today's episode. If you enjoyed it, make sure to follow the show so that you don't miss any new episodes. If you know a friend who you think might like the show, make sure to share it with them. Also, if you want to stay up to date with what's going on with Game Design Hour, make sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok at Game Design Hour. If you enjoyed the episode, also consider leaving us a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much for watching today's episode, and I hope I can see you around next time. Bye!